My name is Gary McGowan and I am the co-owner of Triage Method. We are a company that provide health and fitness, education and coaching, and overall our aim is to level up the standard of education within the fitness industry. And today what I'm going to do is try to take some of the areas that I've developed some knowledge in, tie them all together and answer the question how to return to exercise with COVID fatigue. So if you've had a coronavirus infection and you've got fatigue as a result of that, you're probably wondering how you can get back to exercising in the way that you used to. Many people over the past 2 years have struggled to return to their normal exercise routines, particularly those individuals who've been affected by long COVID or are somewhere on that spectrum. And this is an important note. If you've had the coronavirus and you've been sick with it, there's going to be some sort of spectrum there where you'll have heard of some people who've had very severe complications or people who have had more severe long COVID. And then you'll have those who just don't quite feel right for a few weeks. All of us are somewhere on that spectrum once we've been infected. Some people have nothing at all, no symptoms to start, no symptoms following on from infection. But regardless of where you are, you can take some tips from this video to apply to either COVID-related fatigue or recovery from illness of any cause. So, first things first, why is this an issue? This is an issue because one, fatigue obviously limits your ability to partake in exercise and also potentially makes other activities in your day more difficult. This limits our ability to perform and recover and even commit to the training that we normally do. We've coached hundreds and hundreds of clients at Triage, and one of the things that we know from our coaching over the years is that getting people to adhere to exercise is much easier when they're feeling in their tip-top state of health. If you're feeling in great health, you're in good form, you've got good energy levels, etc., very easy to engage in training. If you're feeling low, whether that be related to your mood, for example, someone with depression, or you're just feeling low on energy, whether that be secondary to diet or illness, it can be very difficult to engage in a standard training program. So this is what people who have had COVID and COVID-related fatigue end up experiencing. They're in this position where it's actually very difficult to adhere to a training program. And if that program is not tailored to the individual, it's even more difficult. So, what are some of the things that you can apply if you're in that position right now? Firstly, one of the things to understand is that when you're getting back into exercise after COVID infection, you can't simply go back to where you were, okay? You can't just go from, having previously trained 5 days per week in the gym for 2 hours a day and then taking 3-4 weeks off because of illness. You can't just go back to that 5 days again, okay? What I would generally recommend to people is to, especially if you're finding yourself, you've been significantly fatigued, I would actually start on that first week with 30 to 50% of the standard training load that I would have been exposed to. So for example, if you were doing 5 days per week and you were doing 20 sets per workout, if you get 30 to 50% of that, you're talking somewhere between 6 and 10 sets per workout across those 5 days for that first week. So instead of doing, 5 exercises, 4 sets each within each workout, you might start by picking 3 or 4 exercises and just doing 2 or 3 sets. That's going to allow you to find an entry point to exercising again, get used to that exercise, rebuild your fitness, rebuild your tolerance to muscle damage and muscle soreness, and not leave you feeling even more fatigued and sore on that first week. Because this is something that I've seen many times over the last 2 years, particularly in those who are on that long COVID spectrum. They've reported that when they do get back into exercise, they're way more fatigued after than they normally would be after a much harder workout. So what ends up happening then is someone gets really excited to get back to the gym, they get stuck into that gym session, they work really hard, but then they're gone for the rest of the week. They're finding it difficult to get out of bed, they have no energy throughout the day, they're not able to go and do another workout. So what they should have been to take that session, cut it down in terms of its overall load, find a really low entry point, and then build up from there. So it could be that on week 1, You start at 30 to 50% of your normal load, you see how you respond, and you titrate upwards from there. You could then move to 40 to 60%, 60 to 80%, and eventually get back to the previous training loads that you were using. And another important point here is that people get very worried after illness. They're like, I need to work hard, I need to get back to where I was ASAP. But what you have to realize is that those gains that you lost within a period of a few weeks, they're very easily regained, okay? Especially for those of us who are young and healthy on average, we tend to do a good job of bouncing back from illness. So once you get back to standard training and build up over a number of weeks, you're going to be fine. You certainly don't need to be training harder than you were previous, because you've taken your fitness level and you've dropped it down. So you no longer need the level of training that was required to get here. You only need to start with a training load that would be similar to someone who's down here, okay? Obviously these are arbitrary measures, but you get the point. You need less training to get from a lower point, okay? If you're moving from a higher point and you're aiming even higher, you need more training, okay? So you don't need that same training that you were doing when you were trying to push to your max, because you're just trying to get back to your baseline. That's really important. Furthermore, there's a number of other techniques that you can use here. Some of these would come from, for example, patients with rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis and other types of fatigue dominant conditions where exercise is important and really useful but needs to be titrated. So one of the things that you can do here is actually start to take your exercise and your activities of daily living and bunch them down into smaller tasks. So for example, if you're struggling to find that entry point, you know, maybe you've listened and you've done your 6 to 10 sets or just 30 minutes of exercise and that's still too much, you could actually start by just doing 5 minutes of exercise multiple times per day. That's what a lot of people with multiple sclerosis will do, and they find that bunching that exercise into smaller chunks allows them to avoid that serious fatigue that compromises their quality of life and their ability to continue exercising. So you can titrate that for yourself, because what you can do is say, right, at what point in the session do I really just find my energy tanking? Maybe it's 15 minutes for you, or maybe it's after your 4th set. And you just stay a little bit below that and aim to push that up over time. Also, we know that people with long COVID seem to have, obviously it's early days, but they seem to have a little bit of non-linearity in terms of their symptoms. So one day they'll be less fatigued, one day they'll be more fatigued, and it's not always very predictable. I've got a friend who trains jiu-jitsu or grappling with me, and that's one of the things that he reports. He shows up for some sessions and he's ready to go. And then another day, I look at him and I say, God, man, you don't look great today. And he says, yeah, you know, I'm really beat up today. He's just not feeling it, even though he was in great shape yesterday. And it's not necessarily that he pushed himself too hard. It's just that there's some level of non-linearity there. So that's the case with any illness. It's the case with any training program. But you have to take it as it comes on the day. If you're not feeling 100%, don't push to the level at which you would be at if you were at 100%, okay? So you gotta be realistic with the standards that you set for yourself on those days. So they're the most important things. Start with a lower overall dose, bunch your exercise into smaller little chunks, and also another thing which is really helpful is don't push to failure. Don't push yourself all the way to the point where you can't do another rep or you're absolutely gasping for breath. Because what you do instead is you say, you know what, I'm going to leave 3 or 4 reps in the tank. So you come to the end of your set and you know, you're fatigued, but you're not feeling like you couldn't have done another rep. Because that contributes to a lot more fatigue than a set that is of lower intensity and further from failure. Similarly, if it's cardiovascular exercise, rather than doing really heavy anaerobic sprint work where you're absolutely gasping for air and your muscles are burning, you might start off with some steady state cardio where you're keeping your heart rate at maybe 130 to 150 beats per minute rather than going all the way to 180, 190, 200 beats per minute close to your max heart rate, because that's going to be a lot more fatiguing. That can be somewhat difficult to calibrate due to the fact that people with COVID-related fatigue and some of the complications can potentially have an elevated heart rate at baseline. So if that's you, you might need to calibrate and titrate your training dose accordingly. Now, of course, this is generic guidance. I'm only giving you some rules of thumb. because this is something that I've been asked about many times, okay? I get a lot of questions about COVID, and in particular, one of the things that has come up multiple times that I've never really gotten around to answering properly is how to deal with getting back to training with COVID-related fatigue. You might have more specific questions related to your specific situation. I'd love to hear them. Drop them in the comments below and I'd be more than happy to get back to you. As I said, it's generic advice, but trust me, it's useful. And trust me, beyond COVID and beyond other viral illnesses, this advice related to titrating your exercise dose in accordance with your state of health at that point in time can be applied to many different situations. With my clients that I work with, I use these similar principles for those with ACL rehab, those coming back from a fracture, those who've been on holidays for a number of weeks and have become somewhat detrained, and so on, okay? They're generalizable principles, so take them and use them when you feel you need to. So that's it for today. That's me, Gary McGowan. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions, drop them below and I'll see you in the next one.